Hello everyone, welcome to the channel, Windows Dev and Art. I'm Stephen Cooley. So glad you guys are here. Today we're going to work on an oil painting with the subject being a crashing ocean wave. And I want to split up this painting into two separate videos, a part 1 and a part 2, just so that we can get a more detailed look at each phase of the painting. So in part 1 for this video, we're going to look at the design process as well as the block-in of the painting. So let's get into it.
The ocean. Such a vast, mighty thing, full of mystery and beauty, reflecting God, its original painter. It's no wonder that artists continue to paint the ocean in its captivating power and unpredictability. Water on rock, foam and froth, colors hardly believable. I want to portray it better than I've been able to each time I set out to try. So, while doing this oil painting, you and I are going to focus on capturing the crashing sea and what it takes to depict the stunning details therein. So, if you are ready, let's make some waves. First of all, we need a plan. So what I like to do to start off is get several reference photos that I like, maybe even just one, and create an image that I want to paint actually on the canvas. And whether you sketch it out or do it digitally, either one works. I like to do mine digitally just because I feel like it gives me a quick way to get an image that I like to paint, and it's in color. I'll look at my reference photo or photos that inspired me and work on making a design to paint. Once you get something that you like, you can start working on testing out whether the composition is good. And you notice on this, I have the main focal point a little bit off center. And that is just visually more pleasing to your eye. And as I started looking at it, I started to wonder if the rock down below and the focal point were a little bit off balance with the other things that I had on the other side. I was wondering, does this make it off balance as far as composition goes? So I flipped the bottom just to see if that would work. I didn't like that, and I ended up creating several different versions of my idea and went with the bottom one on the right and started to look at it to see if it was what I wanted to end up with. And I had the idea of having, these three main things kind of draw your eye into the focal point. That was my intent for it. So having, the little bit of light on the right side of the wave, and then those rocks all just kind of point towards the focal point and draw your eye in. That was the intent. And you notice the shapes of my rocks. If you draw lines of kind of like where they're pointing and just the shape of them, they're all kind of pointing outward and they're all different. Whereas an example of what you don't want to do is have them all kind of the same. And the reason that you don't want to have them the same is just because it just looks awkward and it doesn't look natural. And my original intent for the rocks was to create vectors so as to draw your eye in towards the focal point, which in this case is the eye of the wave. And that worked out until I put both of my versions of my idea into a frame, just because that helps me determine which one I like better visually. And I still liked the older version, and I wondered why. So I talked with my mom and showed her, because she's a really good artist, and she pointed out that the rocks that I had added to the foreground to balance out the painting now actually detracted from the focal point, because there was just too many of them and they were kind of stealing the show and undermining the focal point. So then I took those rocks away that I had added to balance out the painting and then thought, okay, now it looks imbalanced. But I found out that adding a bit of light showing through in the wave there, and adding just a little bit of those sea rocks on the right, balanced out the painting without detracting from the focal point, which is what I went with. So now that we have our image, we're ready to sketch it onto the canvas. So I have a toned canvas with burnt sienna here, and we're going to jump right into the sketching process. So what I use, and you don't have to do this, some people sketch their image onto the canvas, just looking at their reference photo and then just sketching it directly onto the canvas. I have found out that actually using a digital projector is a great way to get the image exact. So I got my projector out and I'm just sketching it onto the canvas with some more burnt sienna paint, and that way I can really get the image exactly proportioned right. So you can see I'm putting it on. The main thing that I have found doing it this way is inevitably the proportions of my sketch won't be exact to the dimensions of my canvas size. And the canvas size that I'm using is an 18 by 24 inch canvas, and I found that the image that I had created for the painting was just probably a little bit more long horizontally than the canvas. It's not that big of a deal, but just keep that in mind if you're going to do it the way I'm doing it here, that the composition has a chance of changing slightly if the dimensions of your image are not the same as the dimensions of your canvas. So I'm using a 18 by 24 inch canvas, and for this particular painting the image pretty much fits those dimensions exactly. I did have about a half of an inch or so on the bottom of my canvas that didn't have any of the image on it, but that's okay. That kind of space doesn't really change the composition as much. So just keep that in mind if you're going to do it the way I'm doing it. I do occasionally just simply eyeball it. That works too. The image does change a little bit when I do it that way. So if you want to get the image exact, in other words, the projector is a great way to do that. And here we have the finished sketch on the toned canvas, making us ready to move on to the next stage, which is the Blockin. Now, I have talked about this particular stage quite a bit in other videos I've done, so I'm going to try to talk a little bit more about how I do it rather than what this Blockin stage is for. So you notice that I am using a larger brush to block in the sky, and I do start with the sky or whatever is farthest away in the painting and work my way forward to whatever is closest. So the rocks are probably going to be the last thing that I block in. So basically what I am thinking when I begin the underpainting here, or the Blockin, is I'm thinking about kind of two main things. I'm thinking about how I can get the paint put onto the canvas as quick as possible, and that's why a lot of times you see my brush strokes are pretty loose, pretty hatchy and quick. And I'm also thinking about how can I create the best image to then let sit and dry, so that I can come back to it and know exactly what to do when I get into the modeling. And I'm sure that you've noticed already that I've switched brushes now and traded in my large brush for a smaller, more angular, kind of pointed brush. And that's just because I found that it is a lot easier to get the flow of the water and kind of the movement and the shapes that I want with this style of brush. So that's just something practical to note for you guys wondering what brushes to go with and what to use in that respect. Also, you notice that I have started to lay on some of that kind of shadowy water color. And as far as choosing color is concerned, when I'm mixing colors, I look at the photo that I'm working from, which in this case is the digital photo that I developed. I really try to pick out all the colors that I see in my reference photo, and then try to use the colors that I have to mix a color that fits with the reference photo. So I will look at the reference photo and think, okay, that's more of a kind of dark green color, which is a little bit more on the cool side. So then I'll mix in a little bit of that ultramarine blue into it. And then if it needs to be lighter, then I put in, you know, some titanium white, etc. So mixing colors, in other words, I would say it doesn't have to be super complicated if you have a basic understanding of warm and cool colors, and also just how to mix colors together in just a really basic way. Like for instance, for the sky, I didn't just use blue and titanium white, but I mixed that cobalt blue with titanium white, but I also added a little bit of either burnt umber or burnt sienna into it. Just a little bit, just to give that illusion of haze in the sky, because often there is more to colors than just the color that you think of. There's more to just a blue sky than just light blue. So don't overdo it, but like for instance, like I've been talking about the sky here, I put just a little bit of brown in it just to kind of offset it and make it kind of signature and stand out just a little bit from the painting. I feel like it just adds interest as well. So yeah, long story short, color mixing doesn't have to be super complicated. Basically, just try to get good at looking at what color is in your reference photo, and learn how to mix your colors to get that same relative color to use in your painting. And the more you mix colors, the better you'll get at it. That's what I've found with me as well. Practice makes perfect, like they say. And as a side note, I'll have the main colors that I mixed from in the description box below, just if anybody's interested in seeing the specific colors that I used in this painting. When painting the green and the eye of the wave here, like you see me doing, to get that color, I just mixed a little bit of medium yellow into the watercolor that I had already been using, just to brighten up that green just a little bit. And then I would add a little bit more of that yellow and then a little bit more titanium white into the mixture as I got farther up towards the center of the eye. And here's a closer shot of me making that green color brighter and brighter until I get to the very top where the water is the thinnest, and so more light will be shining through. It's important as well which way you do your brush strokes, because that will provide you with the motion of the water as you move into the preceding stages of the painting. So when I'm doing my brush strokes, like you can see here, I'm keeping that in mind as I do the Blockin, just so that the movement of the water is communicated effectively. And there is going to be a point at which the water on the wave turns into white water as it crashes over these rocks. So that is what I am painting in at this moment. And basically the color that I used for that was a lot of titanium white mixed in with, I think, a little bit of that sea water color that I had been using in the shadow of the wave, which made a nice greenish gray color. Mostly gray, I would say, though, but still having those green tones in it from the green water above it. And it's also very important when you're doing this part of your painting, the Blockin, to hold back on those bright highlights and from using pure titanium white, just because you want to reserve that for the highlights in the detail stage. So I'm painting everything relatively dull as I work on just basically getting the main colors and shapes put in. So it's gonna look sort of dull when I'm finished, but I want that because that means that I have somewhere to go with the details later on. And now I'm starting to work on the rocks, which is a color combination of Ultramarine Blue and Burnt Sienna. I did use a little bit of a lighter color on the portions of the rock that I wanted to be a little bit more highlighted, where the sunlight is going to be catching it. After we put these rocks in, there's really not that much left to paint, and the Blockin is basically finished. You will notice that there's a little bit of the burnt sienna from the toned canvas showing through. That's fine. It creates a nice effect. I actually want that. I don't want too much of it, but I want a little bit of it. So don't worry about totally covering the entire canvas with paint. It will get covered even more so after the preceding layers get put on in the modeling and the detail stage. But for right now, this is what we want.
Thank you guys so much for watching. That about wraps it up for part 1. Stay tuned for part 2, which will be the modeling and detail stage of this painting to finish it up. Should be a lot of fun. Really excited for that. If you like the video, leave me a like and subscribe for future videos. Until next time, God bless you guys. We'll see you later.